Thank you, Shannon. So it's good to be back. I was away in Florida for a week, a denominational meeting. I'll talk a little bit more about it later, but just want to say up front that every time I go and tell Crosswalk story, I'm really proud to brag on you all because we've done things. You may not know this because you've been in it. Many of you have been in it, for a long time. And you may not know the transformation that has happened here over the last 25 years. It doesn't just happen. It's hard. And when you're in it, you don't even realize what's happening. But what we've created here is creating a model for other people to think about how church can be relevant and sustainable in our nation. Because there are thousands and thousands and thousands of churches our size that are struggling, even dying. And we represent to them hope. And so I'm just so grateful to you for being awesome people and following this journey together because it is a shared thing. So yeah, that's a good thing. Thank you. So we're in this year-long series following the call about following the Sermon on the Mount, sometimes dealing with. And today, as Dave mentioned, we're talking about this. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. And what I hope to help you see today, for myself too, is that a lot of these Beatitudes that start off the Sermon on the Mount, sometimes we approach them as if they're so mysterious and deep. And they are deep, but not necessarily always mysterious. Like I mentioned a few weeks ago, that the one where it says, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Well, I think there's just a very matter-of-fact, plain statement that Jesus is making. That when we attend to our grief, when we mourn, just the act of mourning leads to an element of healing and comfort, just the act of it. And so this one is kind of like that. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. It might help us to ask some questions before we go any further. So these are some things I want you to be thinking about. What distracts or derails us from being our truer, better selves? And what helps us stay centered and grounded? Now, what I'm talking about here with the truer or better selves, there's a monk named Thomas Merton. His ministry ended about 1970-ish, somewhere in there, but he was the predecessor to Richard Rohr, who you may know, follow. I'm a huge fan of Richard Rohr. And Thomas Merton developed this idea, this concept, that coined the words true self. And he's really referring to who we are if he stripped away all the nonsense that culture puts on us. And we were just who we are, this mix of spirit and flesh together, sort of us at our very best, purest selves. That's the true self that he's talking about. It's something that it's always kind of a moving target for us. So I didn't use true self, I used truer. And I didn't use best self, I used better. Because best we may never get there, we may always feel like a failure. But better is just a step away. Truer is just a decision away. And so my question is what gets in the way of that, of us being our better, truer selves? And that second question, how are our truer, better selves differentiated from cultural norms and paradigms? And by that I mean, is there any difference between who God might be calling us to be, this mix of spirit and flesh, and what the culture at large influences us all the time to be? Is there any difference between the way of God and the way of the world, is another way to put that. Because if we don't think there is, we'll never notice if there's a contrast. But if we know there's a difference, we might just see it a little bit better. And then finally, when have good things gotten in the way of better things? So that will make sense in terms of a pure heart thing that we'll get to in a minute. It might help you to know this, that in ancient psychology, please go to this next slide. In ancient psychology, the heart was a person's core, the location of thoughts, feelings, and decisions. A pure heart, then, is the opposite of deceit or trickery, but refers to integrity and sincerity. So they were not confused about they were a little confused maybe about where the brain was, but we understand what they mean in terms of our heart, thinking with our heart. It wasn't just this brain thing, it was more than that. I owe Candace Ramsey, right there. She found a book that is really quite fantastic. It's called Prayers of the Cosmos by Neil Douglas Klotz. And she's been coming up to me after services and showing me, did you bring it today? Oh, you slacker. My goodness. Oh, but you got one. All right, very good. She's been bragging to everybody about this great book, and now a few of us have copies. The New Testament was written in Greek. The Older Testament was written in Hebrew, but Jesus spoke in Aramaic. So this author is helping us understand what was meant in that Aramaic language, which is kind of related to Hebrew. And that's fascinating because it's not an easy translation from Aramaic to English. So this guy, in looking at how Jesus would have spoken it, he gives us a handful of other ways to translate this one passage. He gives you more than this, but I thought these three were particularly interesting. So one thing that Jesus may have been saying in Aramaic, healthy are those whose passion is electrified by deep, abiding purpose. They shall regard the power that moves and shows itself in all things. Isn't that cool? I love this middle one. It's speaking to me today. Aligned with the one are those whose lives radiate from a core of love. They shall see God everywhere. Love that. This last one's cool too. Resisting corruption are those whose natural reaction is sympathy and friendship. They shall be illuminated by a flash of lightning, the source of the soul's movement in all creatures. Just take a minute, read those again, see if one of those resonates with you in particular. Then one final translation from Eugene Peterson's The Message. He says it like this: you're blessed when you get your inside world, your mind and heart, put right. Then you can see God in the outside world. It's really good. All this makes sense. It just makes sense. And this goes back to some things that Jesus would have known as a Jewish man living 2,000 years ago as a peasant in occupied Israel under the oppression of this empire. He would have remembered, as every Jewish person would, a call to worship of sorts. And this comes from Deuteronomy 6. Israel, listen, our God is the Lord, only the Lord. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your being, and all your strength. This ought to sound familiar, because you remember that time when some lawyer comes up and says, hey, Jesus, what's the most important commandment? And he gives us this: love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your being, and all your strength. And then he said, then there's a second like it: love your neighbor as yourself, almost to say they're the same thing. The text continues, these words that I am commanding you today must always be on your minds. Recite them to your children. Talk about them when you're sitting around your house and when you're out and about, when you're lying down and when you're getting up. Tie them on your hand as a sign. They should be on your forehead as a symbol. Write them on your house's door frames and on your city's gates. I've been to Israel, and if you visit what's called the Wailing Walls, this prayer wall, you will see Orthodox Jewish rabbis praying, to the wall, and they'll have these little boxes on their foreheads. They're called phylacteries, and they have perhaps this very text in there. They're following this scripture to a T. What this sort of implies is that if we don't do this thing, if we don't recite it, if we don't keep it front of mind, that it won't be front of mind very long. They're saying to put reminders out. Remind yourselves regularly of what is real, of what actually matters. And I just got to say, this matters today, because I don't know about you, but there's been quite a bit of news in the last couple of months, and quite a bit of turmoil and chaos. And sometimes we can get so distracted by either what we're celebrating or what we're hating that we can lose the reality of what this is saying. This is like saying, hey, United States, pay attention. The Republican Party or the Democrat Party or the United States itself is not God. There is something bigger that lasts longer. That's where we put our focus. That's what we're about. And that is going to carry us through. So we listen to that. And Jesus knew this. He knew this well. That's why he was so quick to say this is the most important thing. But even Jesus had to pay attention, because even Jesus, as great as he was, experienced the temptation to get off of his true north, to get off the bubble, so to speak. And it happened at a surprising time. He was baptized by his distant cousin, John the Baptist, and something happened to him. He had this spiritual moment where he saw things very differently, and he went into the wilderness for 40 days, or a long time anyway, of sorting things out. What did this all mean? And what was he going to do with his life? And that's where we come into this story. So Jesus returned from the Jordan River full of the Holy Spirit and was led by the Spirit into the wilderness. There he was tempted for 40 days by the devil. Now, let me just take a pause here. We're going to see lots of devil talk there, and we have no idea exactly what that means. Here's what I want you to mean. I don't think it means that a guy, with a pitchfork and wearing his biking gear, it's all red, that he's going to show up and, duke it out with Jesus. I don't think it's a little, demon on his on his shoulder, telling him what to do. Think, in other words, of just temptation, or the tempter. This tempter is coming. And so there he was tempted for 40 days by the devil. He ate nothing during those days, and afterward, Jesus was starving. The devil, the tempter, said to him, "Since you are God's son, command this stone to become a loaf of bread." And Jesus replied, "It's written, people won't live only by bread." The temptation here, according to a lot of scholars, is that this temptation was to live led by our physical urges, to be reactionary to things instead of responsive. You know the difference? Reactionary is, this is what I feel like I'm going to do, so I'm just going to do it. You're doing something to make me mad, so I'm just going to blurt it out and yell all over you. If I'm feeling really weak, my urge is saying, I need to pick up another bottle or a fifth of Jack Daniels or whatever your flavor might be. Or in my case, a chocolate milkshake. Or your bucket of fried chicken, or whatever comfort food you love the most. For others of you, it's other physical urges. That the physical urges in and of themselves aren't the problem. It's just that when we live by those things, when we live by our stomach, it can lead us to problems. You know what I mean? That's really what's happening here. He's saying, I'm going to be thinking about what I do from a higher plane than just what I feel my needs are. That's pretty smart stuff. And I'm wondering, what might that be for you? What is your physical thing? It might not be a hunger-related thing, but what is it for you? What is that reactionary thing, that impulse for you that may not be the wisest move? The next thing we see, next the devil led him to a high place and showed him in a single instant that all the kingdoms of the world. The devil said, I will give you this whole domain and the glory of all these kingdoms. It's been entrusted to me, and I can give it to anyone I want. Therefore, if you will worship me, it will all be yours. And Jesus answered, it's written, you will worship the Lord your God and serve only him. The temptation here is selling out for power. It's doing anything to get and keep power. And we have seen this temptation being given into across the centuries by leaders in all industries and governments. The Roman Empire had their share of Caesars who did anything and everything to maintain their power, immoral as all these things may have been. So what we experience in different corners of the globe today, this is not new. This shortcutting to maintain power, this doing whatever it takes, bowing down to other things than God, this is not new. But Jesus was not going to have anything to do with that. He was going to be led by God, which, and other ways to think that, led by love, led by shalom. Finally, the devil brought him into Jerusalem. Oh, wait a minute. Question for you. What's your shortcut been? Have you ever wanted to circumvent the process? Have you ever wanted to go after something that you really felt strongly about, but to do so meant to cause harm somewhere else? Or maybe go against shalom in some way? I don't know what that might be for you, but it's an important question. Because if Jesus dealt with it in this story, which many churches all over the world are reading today, there must be something there about that, about us. Final thing. The devil brought him into Jerusalem and stood him at the highest point of the temple. He said to him, since you are God's son, throw yourself down from here, for it's written, he will command his angels concerning you to protect you, and they will take you up in their hands so that you won't hit your foot on a stone. And Jesus answered, it's been said, Don't test the Lord your God. And after finishing every temptation, the devil departed from him until the next opportunity. This temptation really is about playing God. It's about telling God, I'm going to do something ridiculous, and if you're really God, then you're going to save my life. There are a lot of people that play the lottery like that, right? I'm going to spend my whole check right now and hope it all works out. Come on, God, where are you when I need you? And if it doesn't work out, well, see, and we live our life of faith like this. And Jesus is saying, we're just not going to go that direction. And this other thing is also interesting how it ends, is that the tempter departed from him until the next opportunity. This is informative. There's going to be next opportunities. And your temptation, whatever that may be the next time you turn on the news. It may be, to borrow some language from recovery, you may be halt, hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. And then the temptation comes, whatever it is that fills that void and makes you feel a little better. If it's your chocolate milkshake for me, cheers to you, whatever, but it's going to come. It might come when you're on the top of the world, when you're feeling like you've got it all dialed in. But sometimes, what do they say? Pride comes before the fall. And sometimes we can feel so lofty that we miss the shot coming from the side that could take us down. Well, this is all good. All the stuff that Jesus is talking about in the wilderness temptation stories is all about how do we stay aligned in the face of temptation. There's another story that comes up. This shows up in several Gospels about a team of sisters named Mary and Martha, who were sisters also of a man named Lazarus. Give you a little backstory. Lazarus was a pretty wealthy guy. His sisters Mary and Martha, we don't know their story at all, but they're living with him, which means he has enough money to support them. They're living with him because either they never got married and they couldn't afford to live on their own because that was how it was back then, or they were married but their husbands died or left or who knows what, and now they have nowhere else to go, so their brother Lazarus is taking care of them. This is an early scene with Jesus and them. While Jesus and his disciples were traveling, Jesus entered a village where a woman named Martha welcomed him as a guest. She had a sister named Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his message. So far, so good. By contrast, Martha was preoccupied with getting everything ready for their meal. So Martha came to him, Jesus, and said, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to prepare the table all by myself? Tell her to help me. So this is an interesting story. This is an example of how well aligned are we when you are faced with a choice between good and better. Martha has a right to raise her hand in protest. And the first reason she has a right to do this is because she's recognizing that her sister Mary is committing a major foul that could be embarrassing to her brother Lazarus, could be embarrassing to Jesus himself, could be making the whole room one big awkward moment. Because in that time, if you were a woman, you do not sit where men are supposed to be, at the feet of the rabbi listening. That was disciple space. That was man space, not woman space. So we have an early woman champion. Long before there was Women's History Month, Mary just sensed, this is what I think I need to do. And isn't it amazing that the presence that Jesus had in his being created such a welcoming space that she felt like she could even do that? Isn't that something? It's pretty cool. So on the one hand, we can't really fault Martha for saying, hey, what about this? She's breaking the rule here. We're not supposed to do this. But we find out that it's not so simple, because Martha clearly is remembered as having edge. She triangulates Jesus here. So it's no longer an issue between her and Mary. It's, hey, Jesus, doesn't this make you mad too? Don't you care that Mary here is sloughing off when I'm supposed to, get all the garbanzo bean smash for our dip later on? I mean, that's her tone, right? It's not healthy. Even if she had some right to do it, there's something else going on here. She's mad. She's upset. She's not handling it well. She's reacting, right? Her gut is telling her to just vomit all over this scene. So however uncomfortable this scene was a second ago, it just got worse. Now there's a really awkward moment, two awkward moments. Mary sitting at Jesus' feet, and now Martha's made a stink. And everybody's just sitting there with it, certainly looking at Jesus, who answered, Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things. One thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the better part. It won't be taken away from her. Now let's unpack this just a little bit. He's saying that there was a better option here, that she had a good reason. She had a good option, maintaining the rules, following the rules. That's all good. There was a tradition to uphold, and that's good. But there was a better thing that was emerging, that was going to be more inclusive and empowering and celebrating, something that we'd be talking about even now, 2,000 years later. There's a better that's better than the good. And then we also just need to recognize and really celebrate this. Mary and Martha are two different people. They may be sisters, but they're different. My brother and I are very similar. We even look alike, quite a bit alike. But he's a mechanical engineer, and I'm a pastor. He hates public speaking. You can't get me to shut up, right? I'm the people guy. He's the guy that would rather, be nerding out on whatever project he's doing. He's the craftsman. He can make anything with his hands. He can fix most things because that's how his brain works. I'm the guy that can fix some things and probably not with perfection, right? We're very different. Martha is different than Mary. Neither one is better. My hunch is that Martha, her personality makeup and everything about her, she is gifted with hospitality. She loves to do hospitality. Even though she looks kind of grumpy right now, I think she loves to do it. That's what she's about. It brings her joy to do the prep, to make it look amazing, to have everybody seated there, to put it in front of them and them feel so blessed by this amazing spread. She's just waiting for these oohs and ahs, but now it's become more complicated because Mary decided to sit at Jesus' feet. So she's getting frustrated because it's getting in her way of this spread that she wants to do, and to hear them having conversation over the hummus and the fish and whatever else they're eating, that would just bring great joy to her. And even as she took the dishes away and cleaned, to hear them just continuing their conversation, their joy, a person who's gifted in hospitality, they just eat that up, right? How many of you have that gift? You just love to host and stuff? All right, there's a couple of you, right? All right, some of you aren't quite sure. We'll ask your friends. We'll find out just how true that is. Right, you get this. There's nothing wrong with Martha. There's nothing wrong with Martha. But she's different than Mary. It could be that Martha has no interest in sitting at the feet and listening to a lecture, like some of you here today who may have been dragged in here against your will, but you're here, and I thank God for you. All right? But Mary is wired that way. She wants to hear. She wants to have this experience, this exchange. Neither person is better, right? So we're not judging Martha versus Mary. We're just recognizing there was a rule that was chosen to be broken, and that rule breaking was appropriate and right. That was the better decision. Jesus did that time and again. He knew what the tradition was. He knew what the rule was. And he recognized, because of the voice of the Spirit, there is a better thing to do than to follow that rule. So that brings me to these questions, which hopefully you'll be thinking about, because that's really what I hope you'll chew on for the rest of the week. But a couple stories. When I was a pastor in northern Illinois, about 100 miles out of Chicago, it was my first church. I was right out of seminary, 25 years old, and this aging congregation invited me to be their pastor. What fools. What's a 25-year-old pastor going to know about anything, right? But they gave me this huge umbrella of grace because they knew that church ministry can be hard sometimes. It can chew you up and all this stuff. And so they were very kind and gracious to let me just do stuff. And so the church was kind of flatlined. It was just kind of staying steady, but wasn't really growing or anything. And so they let me try out some ideas. And some of those ideas had to do with strengthening the youth program. That's some of kind of what we're doing here with children, and youth is around the corner because these kids they actually age. They don't just stay in one era, and we're going to need something for them coming up. So anyway, we did some things to implement some youth ministry stuff there. And lo and behold, in time, this kid showed up to church, teenage guy, and I don't think he'd ever been to church before. And as he entered the sanctuary, he had the audacity to wear a baseball cap. And one of our older saints marched right up to him and said, "Young man, we do not wear baseball caps in church." And she was kind of known for being a grump, all right? I got along with her fine, loved her, but she could be grumpy. And I heard about this after the fact and was just thinking, her intent was good. Let's keep the sacred space just the way it's supposed to be, where everybody dresses up and we honor God with our clothing and all that stuff. But there was a better thing. And that better thing was that this kid, who this might have been his very first experience in church, felt completely welcomed as he was. It's not like anything he was wearing was offensive. It was just a ball cap. And he didn't know any better, or at least handle it better if it's really that important. That was an example of one person wanting to hold on to the good when a better thing was there. And then I think about my week this past week. It's a 3-year commitment that I'm in this denominational meeting, and it's an invite-only thing, so it's an honor to be invited, and year 2 is when we present. And frankly, I don't get real nervous when I'm here teaching, because this is home for me, and you're my people, and all that stuff. I was anxious about this. I'd been stewing on what I was going to talk about for months. And up until the last minute, I'm still thinking through some changes. And the reason why is, one, I didn't want it to suck with all my peers and some denominational leaders. I thought that'd be a real bummer. But even more than that, I wanted it to actually be helpful. I wanted it to maybe inspire some pastors who are in a tough spot, to give them the encouragement to go for it, based on who they are. And I knew that there'd be a couple points. I put up a screen of sort of the major changes we've made in this place over the last 25 years. I knew that one would set them off. I was surprised by another. Some cringe-worthy moments for some of the people in the audience. The one that I knew for sure, some would be a little uneasy with, because American Baptists, we're very broad. It's a big umbrella. And we have people of different theological positions on ranges of issues, from race to LGBTQ to worship style to theology and all this. And so one of the changes I listed was that we became boldly a welcoming and affirming congregation. That it happened pretty organically, that it was a decision we made over time, and collectively we're just like, yeah, that's who we are, and we lean into that. We're much more than that, of course, but I knew that one would make some guys shift in their seat, and it did. Some of the guys in there, in fact, many of them some of the more conservative guys came up to me later and said, "Well, I disagree about your theology. We disagree on that, but I appreciate," and then blah, 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 what they did. So I knew that one was coming. What surprised me from the feedback right after, because that's another thing I won't go into, but a guy comes to me and says, "Well, okay, so we were talking about things that were happening here," and the guy's telling me, a fellow pastor, he's saying, "So the thing that surprised me is they knew the gay thing, but they didn't expect that changing the theology from evangelicalism to open and relational theology would cause them to grimace and shift even more." But the reason it did was because in changing to an open relational way of thinking, it was an inherent challenge to what they were saying was the only way. And the reason I wanted to share all this stuff was, one, I'm in my mid-50s, right? And a lot of the pastors who are there are younger than me. And by having one of the older guys say, "You can do this," I lived. Barely at times, but I lived. And we got through it, and the church is better for it. That there was a tradition to maintain. There were things that happened in the past, and so many good things in this church's history. Good grief, so many things. We've been around since 1860, But all along the way, under many, many pastors for a very long time, there has been a sense of the better. Let's do this. And the whole thing was just to say, there's always going to be this nudge toward the better. What are we going to do? And Crosswalk, that's still going to be us. We're not done. Who knows what the nudges are going to be as we go forward? But as we sense the Spirit calling us, we're going to do it. Because why wouldn't we want to do that? These are things that I see taking place right here with Mary and Martha. And I want to tell you, as I did already, that it was really encouraging for some guys. One guy came up to me, and I knew because of the introductory stuff we did, and I know him personally, I know what he's going through. He was down in the dumps, feeling defeated, feeling he didn't have anything to say, and now he feels like he's got another chapter in him. He's got another shot at him. There are other churches that are where we were, several years ago, and what they see and what we're doing, not that we're the model, but that we represent a model that can be effective in the community. And so he wants to pursue that. Well, that's our impact going well beyond us. In a time and era where the big box churches are winning the attention, part of what I did, all right, can I tell you something that's a little weird? Part of my setup was there's this sitcom that ran from 2015 to 2020. It's called Schitt's Creek. Have you ever watched Schitt's Creek? Yeah. So I had this slide of Schitt's Creek. And I told all this group of pastors and the denominational leaders, okay, everybody, hey, how many of you watched this show? And a bunch of hands went up and said, everybody say Schitt's Creek. And so all these people are saying Schitt's Creek. And I said, I just wanted to make you say it because it sounds like you're saying shit, but you're really just saying shit. So it kind of got them on this thing. And the whole point of that is that the storyline of these leaders that's played primarily by Eugene Levy is that he lost everything. He lost all of his money and power, and he ends up in this little town. That's the name of the town. And he had to pivot and figure out, what do we do next? And the whole story over years is how he's transformed, how everything has changed in the way he thinks. And the storyline ends, don't want to spoil anything, but too bad. The storyline ends with him taking his business acumen and his entrepreneurship and going to venture capitalists, and he says to them this. Says, I've been living in a dumpy hotel in Nowheresville for the last 5 years, and I didn't think there was anything there. But then I realized there are thousands of hotels that are struggling and dying. And if we can help them along, they can thrive. And I've stayed in one of those. How many of you have ever passed through Paso Robles? Yeah, I stayed in one of these hotels that probably at one time would have been shuttered. But somebody had a vision for it. Somebody didn't see something that needed to be leveled. Somebody saw the possibility of something incredible happening. And so Lynn and I stayed in this little place, kind of has this Western cowboy theme thing. It was adorable. It was like a spa, not too crazy expensive, but it was great. And so my point of that with this meeting was, just like in Schitt's Creek, we have thousands of churches that maybe are being passed over. But what if? What if? I never would have imagined this is who we would have been, but what if we follow the Spirit of God based on who we are, the community that we serve, all these things? What could be possible? And they started to catch that vision too. It's wonderful. So thank you again, because you helped a lot of pastors ease up and swear in a meeting that they otherwise wouldn't have sworn in, and you gave them hope because you have been awesome. There's no such thing as a leader who leads alone. This is us, and we have created something really amazing here. So thank you for that. I want to lead you in a brief prayer. Thank you. Yeah. I want to lead you in just a brief meditation, and then we'll say this version of the Lord's Prayer together. So let's pray together. So in silence and stillness and the solitude of our personal space, God, speak to us now. We've been talking about purity of heart, God. Help us see, help us hear your Spirit speak to us. What do we need to take home today? What do we need to hear? Maybe for some of us, it's just the idea that there is a truer self that is within us. Something to be tapped, something to grow from. For others, maybe the Spirit is reminding us that maybe we've gotten distracted. Maybe we've been encouraged today to find new ways to pursue the better over the good. Speak to us, Spirit of God. Speak to us, Spirit of God, and let us know what might our next step be in response to what we've heard. What are you inviting us into, which is totally our choice to say yes or no, but what might our next step be toward living with a pure heart that we might see you everywhere? Remind us, God, of who we really are. Remind us of what you've called us to be. Remind us of the hope that we have, the joy that is before us, even if the next steps are difficult. Be our companion in our sorrow and our struggle, that we might one day rejoice in each other's company more fully. To that end, God, we lift our gaze to the prayer and say it together. Ground of all being, mother of life, Father of the universe, your name is sacred beyond speaking. May we know your presence. May your longings be our longings in heart and in action. May there be food for the human family today and for the whole earth community. Forgive us the falseness of what we have done as we forgive those who are untrue to us. Do not forsake us in our time of conflict, but lead us into new beginnings. For the light of life, the vitality of life, and the glory of life are yours now and forever. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you had a good experience. We will see you next week. All right.